Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where and when you're watching this. Welcome to Lesson 20, The Secret War for History 493. I hope everybody is keeping safe wherever you are, and we're making some progress. I'm going to go ahead and go down the slides, so I'll let you know when I'm changing slides if you want to follow along. So moving to the administration slide. Things generally seem to be going pretty well. People are figuring out the whole upload thing, and I have finally figured out and sent out an email how to let you share videos to my playlist if you have a YouTube channel of your own. So you can go ahead and start doing that. Nevertheless, there are still some glitches, and the fact that I'm doing this much later than I planned, well, it's the way things are. Nevertheless, I think things are going pretty well, but do let me know if you have any questions or concerns. The biggest change since the last time we spoke was the library is now closed because campus is shut down. And believe me, that made for an interesting day yesterday for me. But while the library is physically closed, the librarians are still there and they are still able to assist you. You just need to email them or get on chat with them, and they can help you out with a lot of electronic resources. Speaking of resources and librarians, it's turning out in general to be much harder for many of you to find the 3 reviews for your books than I expected. I'm really kind of surprised, and I'm not quite sure why. But if you're checking the journals and the such not, electronic, obviously we don't have access to print anymore, so that's going to make things a little more difficult. You can also look at some of the major magazines, Time, Newsweek, The Economist, those sorts of things. Those might be of value. And the big newspapers, the Chicago Tribune, the New York Times, or newspapers in general have some pretty good reviews. And sometimes they're syndicated, so that works out pretty well too. You can also look at sites like HNet. Oh, I beg your pardon. At sites like HNet or let's see, Michigan. Michigan does military history reviews too. So those are some useful sites you can look at that will have quality reviews. If you're still coming up short and you've consulted with the librarians to no luck, don't worry. Don't panic, as Douglas Adams would remind us. We'll go ahead and we'll figure something out. You're not going to, don't worry about for credit. The exercise of trying to find them is really what I want you to accomplish. So do your best. That's all I'm asking. Other than that, if you have any questions, be sure to let me know and we'll see what we can do. All right, moving on to the jobs slide. Yeah, it just amazes me the number of historians that are employed by the federal government and at excellent wages. In this case, somebody who's employed by the National Park Service, we usually think of the National Park Service as using historians as rangers, but here we have an actual historian position at Fort Scott. And I hadn't remembered this until I was recording the video for History 352, but I've been there. It's actually a really nice historic site. It's well worth a visit if you're traveling I-70 somewhere post-pandemic, and it doesn't look like a bad job to me. Looks like a pretty exciting one, actually, especially for somebody who has an interest in Middle American history or military history or something of that sort. So, the opportunities are out there. Moving on to the writing tip, William Taft doesn't get a lot of great press as a president. He wasn't overly successful, but he did have a unique sort of post-presidential career. He became Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, the only person to ever hold both of those offices. And whether or not you favor his politics or his political or judicial career, we think we can agree with what he has to say about writing. It's really easy when we're writing and somebody looks at our work and says, well, I read it this way, to say, no, you're wrong. This is how I meant it. And with that explanation, oh, now we agree, we can move on. No, now you've got to go back and you've actually got to revise the text in such a way that it can't be misunderstood. So I realize that's a lot of effort, but what you have to do is divorce yourself from the desire to defend your work, which is what we tend to do as human beings, and recognize that somebody else's interpretation could be valid even if it isn't the interpretation you intended. So see what you can do about making yourself unable to be misunderstood. Okay, moving on to the next slide, our topic assignments. We finished up the Northwest Europe campaign on Tuesday. Today is the Secret War with Corey and Naomi presenting. Naomi's had some technical difficulties. Her video is in 2 parts, and she's gotten part 1 uploaded as of this time, but not part 2. Or I should not say as of this time, as of my recording. Excuse me, I decided to just go ahead and record mine and get it out there too, because I didn't want to go too far past our theoretically appointed class time. Oh, excuse me. Okay. For next week, of course, is spring break, and that'll give everybody a chance to just kind of catch your breath and relax a little bit, hopefully, and move on from there. But we'll be looking forward to hearing from Adam and Garrett about the war in the air. And then on Thursday, Gabby and Trevor will be talking about America Transformed. Since we do have spring break coming up, feel free to finish whenever. If you have your videos ready to go ahead and let me know, or go ahead and post the link to the playlist early, and that's just fine. Just fine. All right, moving on to our final slide to talk about the 6 books of the Secret War. Thanks to Corey for covering the Secret War and seizing the Enigma, and thank you to Naomi for covering Operation Paperclip and soon to be covering Target Tokyo. That leaves me with Bodyguard of Lies and Operation Mincemeat. I'll talk a little bit about each book, and then I sort of want to speak to the generalities of intelligence history and secret war history and that sort of thing. The first one I'm going to talk about is Anthony Cave Brown's Bodyguard of Lies, and this one came out in the 1970s, almost immediately after the declassification of Ultra. So this is one of the first works of World War II history that was written after it became known that the Allies had access to many German codes during World War II, though many of the details of that project were not yet released, but at least the the existence of it was, so people knew that much. Brown, the book is subtitled about D-Day, and that is his main focus, but he goes deeper into things. He does talk about Ultra quite a bit and the breaking of codes, but his main focus there is that the existence of Ultra was what allowed the Allies, especially the British, to carry out such effective deception efforts. Meaning that when the Allies put a piece of deception, a piece of false information out there to figure out if the Germans bit on it, they could look to Ultra to say, okay, now the Germans are reacting. We know that they have accepted this falsehood, this deception. He talks about a lot of the deception operations that were carried out prior to the planning and Operation Overlord, i.e. D-Day. Specifically looks at things like the Battle of El Alamein in North Africa, and he He does take a good look at Operation Mincemeat as well, more about that later. But he really focuses on Operation Fortitude, which was the deception plan, or plans, there were actually more than one, that surrounded planning for D-Day, for Operation Overlord, for the invasion of Normandy. The Allies knew that this was the Western Allies at least, knew that this was the most important operation of the war for them, that if it was a failure, then they were going to, it was going to extend the war. It may not change who was ultimately going to win it, but it was going to make it much more costly and a much longer proposition. So, as Churchill told Stalin, and this is where the title of the book comes from, in wartime, truth is so precious that she should always be attended by a bodyguard of lies. So the truth of the D-Day plan would be surrounded by falsehoods. And these ranged everything from inflatable tanks to intelligence leaks. The entire German spy network in Britain by this point had been turned into double agents, so they would feed information to the Germans. It involved false radio traffic. It involved making George Patton the commander of a fictitious army group. It even involved upset letters from alleged clergymen in East Anglia, which is where the false army was forming to invade Europe by the Pas de Calais rather than Normandy, clergymen upset about American soldiers discarding condoms in their regions. So all these details came together to paint a portrait or a series of portraits of anything but Normandy. There was a fortitude operation that seemed to indicate that the Allies were going to invade Norway. The biggest one was wrapped around the idea of the Pas de Calais, which is the narrowest part of the English Channel between Dover in Britain and Pas de Calais in France. But again, Brown's argument is really around the interaction of intelligence and deception and how this was so successful. As a writer, Brown is very good, very followable, very readable. He tells a lot of good stories. He provides a lot of anecdotes alongside his analysis. If you haven't seen the movie The Imitation Game, it's a really good movie. As history, it's a little shakier because what they did for the movie was they simply compacted a lot of events together and gave the code breakers a lot more influence and power than they actually had in the real world. For dramatic purpose, you don't hire a lead actor like Benedict Cumberbatch and say, oh yeah, now you're going to go off to the side for an hour while other people handle the show. But at any rate, Brown includes a lot of neat little details, like Turing apparently, when he was called to conferences in London, would run there 40 miles wearing an old suit and with an alarm clock tied around his waist rather than carrying a wristwatch or a pocket watch. Bits like that really bring the tale to life. And for the time, he did very good research. Hastings, if you very briefly, if you look at the preview of the preface to Hastings, The Secret War, is rather critical of Brown, but he never says why, and that's a little frustrating. I know Hastings has the the advantage of another 40 years of research, but I also tend to think there's a touch of professional jealousy, and I'll get to the why of that in a moment. I'm going to turn now to Operation Mincemeat. Oh, excuse me. Operation Mincemeat by Ben McIntyre. And of the all the books that we're considering today, this is probably the narrowest in that it is about a very specific deception operation that's mentioned in Hastings, that's mentioned in Brown. It's one that's actually fairly well known. The chief architect of Operation Mincemeat, I should summarize. Operation Mincemeat was a deception plan that was designed to convince the Germans that the Allies were going to invade Sardinia rather than Sicily in 1943. So the goal was to convince the Germans to move their defenses away from Sicily, or at least not reinforce Sicily, and to instead send them to Sardinia, where the Allies were not planning to invade. And the trick here was to acquire a corpse that could be made to appear that it had drowned, to load up this corpse with false identity, papers and various documents that, when found, would convince the Germans that they had uncovered a victim of an aircraft crash who had been carrying real, genuine, secret plans for the invasion of Sicily. Invasion of Sardinia, rather than Sicily. See, I've been deceived. It worked. So it's a somewhat grisly tale, but also an incredibly bizarre one of these very sort of eccentric characters putting together this plan, collecting a body that could be made to appear that it had died by drowning, concocting a life for this individual. The identity card, the false identity card for this individual, was named Major Martin of the Royal Marines, is actually on the first slide today. But everything from making sure his clothes were appropriate to things like sticking theater stubs in his pockets. A picture of a supposed girlfriend was carried with him along with the actual plans, and then to be dumped at the right spot. Specifically near enough the coast of Spain that the body would wash up on the shore, be found by the Spanish, who were sympathetic to the Germans, though not allied with them, and pass the information along to the Germans, before they returned the corpse and the documents to the British as they were supposed to do. And amazingly, it all worked remarkably well. The story came out when the chief protagonist wrote a book called The Man Who Never Was, but McIntyre has gone much beyond that. The Man Who Never Was a best-selling book, and they made a movie out of it. But even at the time in the 60s when Mincemeat was declassified and The Man Who Never Was came out, a lot of the details remained classified. McIntyre has found a treasure trove of information through very meticulous research, and then he tells a really, really enjoyable story. Now, all that being said, let's take just a couple moments and talk about this concept of secret war and intelligence history. You may have noticed that of all the books on the list, only one of them is written by, well, two of them maybe. Yeah, two of them are written by actual historians. Four of them are written by journalists who have turned to history. And there's some reasons for this. One is spies and codes and secret warfare. They all have an inherent interest. There's a drama to it. There's a reason why, they're making the 550th James Bond film or something like that right now, because they're exciting, they're interesting tales. Excuse me. And people are interested in them. So journalists who are looking to break into history, why not? You want to pick something that's going to sell, right? And spies sell. And this, by the way, I think may be part of the issue with Hastings and Brown. There may be some professional jealousy there of Hastings, of Brown's success in this regard, and that may be why he dismisses Brown's work without really explaining why he's dismissing it. That's a little questionable for one historian to do to another, but if there's some professional jealousy involved, it's not unheard of. So if this sort of history is inherently popular and it attracts journalists, what does that leave for the professional historian to do with it? But I think both Prang and Kahn have done excellent work in this regard. This sort of history, this sort of research requires a certain degree of doggedness, because more so than any other aspect of warfare, this is designed not to be known, to be kept secret. In my own military career, I had access to assorted classified projects, etc., at various points, and the interests of those who are charged with maintaining the security of such projects versus those who are charged with documenting them are at odds. There was always a desire on the part of the security conscious to, well, just destroy the documents, just destroy that, get rid of it, so that way we don't have to worry about it, and we don't have to worry about losing it or somebody else getting a hold of it. The less information there is, the better. In fact, I once joked with our security controller, who took it well, that he would be happiest if we would take the classified equipment we were working on, break it into pieces, burn it to bits, and bury it in the desert. It wouldn't do anybody any good, but certainly nobody would ever find out about it. And so there's some truth to that, I think. So looking at these 6 books, what they are mainly are exercises in uncovering things that people did not want uncovered. And in that, I think they're all quite successful. All right. So that's about it as far as I can tell for the Secret War. We'll be moving on after spring break to the War in the Air. I look forward to hearing about that, and I look forward to seeing your questions and answers on the discussion board. Talk to you later.